obviously incredibly insanely bullish for the price of Bitcoin. I think that this thing can get completely out of control really fast. You won't even be able to buy sub-$1 million Bitcoin. And that's coming. People, when people think about Bitcoin, they don't realize it's like we're a couple dominoes or one domino away from this thing really getting to the next level. There's nothing like Bitcoin, and these Bitcoin treasury companies are fascinating, and it's starting to show that Bitcoin is an asset that's here and it's here to stay. It could take just one government action, one large corporation, and then this thing is just completely off to the races, and there's no turning back in any serious way. That could be something as simple as
Mr. Joe Burnett, one of your recent tweets, Wall Street needs Bitcoin. Bitcoin does not need Wall Street. Those who hold the coins inherit the world. This is kind of the topic of the day. You get the cypherpunk ethos versus the Bitcoin treasury companies, all these different competing factors in the Bitcoin world, in Bitcoiner, ethos world. What do you mean by this tweet? How are you guys riding the line at Semler when it comes to this thing, which I think is the kind of like the argument and the fight of the day that is kind of there in the public, but also underneath the surface too?
Yeah, Brandon, thanks for having me on. This is a fascinating topic that I think, is kind of becoming very timely and hot given the rise of Bitcoin treasury companies, which in a way is like Wall Street kind of coming in and trying to buy as much Bitcoin as possible. And it's also timely. And I think, given my experience where I previously worked at Unchained, which is, all about, empowering self-custody and eliminating single points of failure, and really has the core Bitcoin ethos. And then also now working at Semler Scientific, which is a publicly traded Bitcoin treasury company. And it's a very interesting dynamic. And I think like both sides of the hardcore core Bitcoin ethos, probably misinterpret some things. And then also the Wall Street side trying to come into Bitcoin also probably, misinterpret some things.
Mm-hmm.
I think like the core Bitcoin ethos is incredibly important. Like when it comes to Bitcoin treasury companies, I don't think any individual out there should just only hold Bitcoin treasury companies. The only reason Bitcoin treasury companies are worth anything is because of the core fundamental, asset that is Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. It's an asset that you can hold without counterparty risk, without trusted third parties. It's outside the realm of banks and government itself. It's this true sovereign, perfectly scarce monetary tool. And it's valuable because it's outside of the existing system. And obviously individuals that are out there that want that form of sovereignty should obviously hold actual spot Bitcoin. However, I think Bitcoin treasury companies do provide an interesting product, so to speak, for the traditional world or for individuals that aren't necessarily paying attention as closely as a lot of us have been over the years. And for example, there's kind of two reasons why this is interesting. One is, and Saylor had this slide in one of his recent presentations, but it was basically 97% of institutional capital can't buy Bitcoin, the commodity, directly. They have to buy equity or credit. And so a lot of people managing, trillions and trillions of dollars, might somewhat be interested in Bitcoin, or they might be, curious about Bitcoin. And, if they believe in a truly diversified portfolio, they probably should have at least a small Bitcoin allocation at this point. Yet their investment mandate prevents them from buying actual spot Bitcoin, the commodity. Mm-hmm. And so you have all this trapped capital to some extent with, normal, which effectively probably just belongs to normal people that are kind of like blindlessly saving for their future that, hopefully will start paying attention at some point. But for now, they're not paying attention and they don't own much Bitcoin, or they don't own any Bitcoin. I think it's important that that trapped institutional capital that belongs to those people can get some exposure to Bitcoin, the asset, and kind of can slowly start benefiting from NGU technology that we all know like Bitcoin actually is. And I think once those portfolio managers understand that and they get an allocation and they see, for a 4-year time period, they see their Bitcoin assets, do a lot better than their traditional assets. And then, individuals that may not be paying attention might be like, oh, wow, my portfolio, did really well. Like this Bitcoin thing that's, small little portion of my portfolio did really well. This is kind of interesting. And then they start to go down like the core Bitcoin rabbit hole of like, okay, first I learned about number go up. Now I can learn more about like, okay, what are like the true fundamentals of Bitcoin and like why is it important? And maybe why should I own some of my own, spot Bitcoin for myself in a sovereign manner. And so I think that, Bitcoin treasury companies are really just, entrepreneurs that are meeting that market demand of, I want the number go up technology. I need to buy it via equity or credit. I can't just buy spot Bitcoin directly. And they're filling that need for the market. And that's why we see them trading at a premium. That's why we see the explosion of them occurring. And then the second reason I think that, we're seeing this kind of rush in Bitcoin treasury companies and Wall Street is kind of trying to, use Bitcoin and use it as a great product that they can sell to their investors or their clients is because of what Michael Saylor calls intelligent leverage. And all this really is it's pairing Bitcoin, a long duration asset, right? Like I don't necessarily know what Bitcoin's going to be worth tomorrow, next month, or even next year, but I'm fairly confident over the next 4 years, or especially over the next 10 years, it's probably going to be worth a good bit more than it's worth today, especially in dollar terms. And so Bitcoin is this long duration savings asset, and Bitcoin treasury companies, many of them, are pairing that long duration saving asset with long duration, low interest rate debt, right? So it's like you look back at how you would historically leverage up a Bitcoin position. You would go on something like BitMEX or another crypto futures exchange. You would click 2x long Bitcoin, but that comes with risk. The interest rate is extremely variable. It could get really high at certain times. It's called like the funding rate on BitMEX and some of those other platforms. And then also you have short-term liquidation risk to where if Bitcoin falls 50% in a short period of time and you have a 2x long position, you're liquidated, you lose all your Bitcoin. It's a horrible experience. And so Bitcoin treasury companies pair that long duration, low interest rate debt that's at a fixed rate and then buy Bitcoin with it. And so the whole idea is you buy Bitcoin in general, you effectively short the dollar. That's kind of what you're doing when you borrow dollars and buy more Bitcoin. And so if you think that over the long run, that Bitcoin will outperform traditional assets, more specifically, Bitcoin will outperform fixed income assets, then it's reasonable to potentially expect Bitcoin treasury companies that are implementing that strategy to outperform Bitcoin itself, which is relatively interesting for anyone that, thinks Bitcoin is going to go up a lot. And so I think that that's kind of like the market need that Bitcoin treasury companies are kind of fulfilling for the traditional finance system. And then for maybe the more speculative investors that want to take a little bit of extra risk and are comfortable with the extra volatility that may want to outperform holding spot Bitcoin. But at the end of the day, like I mentioned at the start, it's absolutely no replacement for true, real spot Bitcoin. It's that's the only reason why these Bitcoin companies are valuable to begin with, because Bitcoin is this bearer asset that can be held outside the hands of banks and government itself.
Yeah, I love that answer. That's great. I couldn't agree more. Being the director of Bitcoin strategy at Semler Scientific and being, I don't know, the private world, I guess, for a long time or much of your life. And now you're in the public world of doing these things. How, we have a lot of people that are 35 to 65 years old. Obviously a lot of people have, they tend to be male that watch this channel, probably a lot of Bitcoiners just in general, people that are interested in finance investment, and they're looking at the retirement stuff. So again, that's where like Semler, a lot of these companies are coming into play. At the same time, how does the average person that might be looking to take a jump and say, hey, I'm telling my financial advisor, I'm out of here, I'm out of my 401k, or I whatever it is. How does the average person build their own strategy, their own, Semler Scientific Bitcoin treasury for their own family? What would you suggest people are doing when they're looking at the wealthiest companies in the world doing this? Like what's the signal within all the noise that's going on that the average person should be looking at and kind of, trying to decipher?
Yeah. I think, like I mentioned, like nothing competes with cold storage Bitcoin. That's a core asset. I think the fact that we're seeing the rise of Bitcoin treasury companies occurring is a great sign for Bitcoin, the asset itself. It shows like the market is going out there and creating securities that normal people or investment managers want to buy, and and Bitcoin treasury companies are providing that service, and the proliferation of them is a sign that it's a product that's in demand, that's good for the market, and could potentially be good for individuals or institutions alike. And so I think like when it comes to an individual person, I can't give investment advice, and I also obviously can't say to buy Semler stock. But I think it's Bitcoin is the core asset. Bitcoin treasury companies are an interesting thing that is available now on traditional brokerage accounts. And I think your allocation to all of your specific assets, whatever you're trying to allocate to, obviously depends on like your risk preference, your volatility preference, and so much more that you would have to like talk to each individual person with, or an actual financial advisor would have to talk to each individual person with. But yeah, I mean, I think that there's nothing like Bitcoin, and these Bitcoin treasury companies are fascinating, and it shows that to the traditional world that's not really paying attention, is starting to show that Bitcoin is an asset that's here, and it's here to stay, and it's really valuable. It's like that that meme that we've seen plenty of times of like, oh, I thought Bitcoin died. Oh, I thought Bitcoin died again. Oh, actually, no, it just made a new all-time high once again. And it's like over and over and over again, Bitcoin doesn't die. It keeps going higher over a long period of time. And like that's slowly waking people up and helping them realize that, all right, maybe if I was skeptical at first, which almost everyone is initially skeptical of Bitcoin because it's a complicated idea and most people haven't thought about what money is. Well, if I'm skeptical at first, but the market is kind of in a way proving me wrong, potentially, maybe I should start looking into this and at least trying to grasp the other argument that many Bitcoin people have been talking about for quite some time. Try to grasp why that might be right, considering the market is kind of telling me that they actually may be right.
Yeah. So well said. Do you think that so we just had the event of the 80,000 Bitcoin, coming into the market, and Bitcoin went down, a handful of percent or a few $1,000, in essence, and really just absorbed it. And it was just like, yeah, so what? And that was like a thing for a long time that people are always worried about, these big liquidation events or Mount Gox, whatever it is, like coming back on the market and flooding the market with a bunch of Bitcoin, and who's going to buy it? And again, you have Semler, Saylor, you've got MetaPlanet. I mean, there's all these companies now are like, well, we're here, we're here now. And obviously retail is going to do its thing, and the Bitcoiners that are out there, but you have these huge liquidity pools. Are we seeing the cheap Bitcoin window closing fast here? Like, is that a sign? Like, I feel like it's like this again, signal within all the noise that's going on of like, whoa, this window might be closing here, where we keep, price goes down over time, but like it's always met by a really convicted group of individuals or corporations that are like, no, we're here, we're going to keep buying. Is that what it says to you? Like when you see that over the last week, like what does it signal to you?
Yeah, that was really interesting. Like seeing the fact that supposedly 80,000 Bitcoin was sold via Galaxy. And then Galaxy obviously went, found counterparties to sell that to, went to exchanges likely to sell that to, and so on and so forth. And we did see Bitcoin fall a little bit, but, like last week's dip in the price of Bitcoin was nothing out of the ordinary, right? I mean,
Right.
If you've been here for a while, you know that Bitcoin is incredibly volatile, and that very easily could have been just a normal week that you would never have known that a fairly large Bitcoin position was liquidated. At the same time, I believe it's correct that Strategy wasn't even in the market last week. They weren't even buying Bitcoin, and obviously they plus the ETFs at this point are probably like the two largest buyers, and then the rest of the treasury companies are fairly large buyers as well. But to me, it just shows that like, okay, 80,000 Bitcoin was sold last week. One of the largest buyers was practically out of the market, or likely out of the market. That means this market is pretty liquid, and there's potentially a large number of other buyers that are actively accumulating Bitcoin on a pretty regular basis, whether that's governments themselves, other corporations, other institutions, individuals that are just stacking sats in a clear, consistent, humble manner. And I think it's a really great sign, and it's a sign to people that, again, like are kind of on the outside. They think Bitcoin's some sort of endless bubble or Ponzi scheme that just won't fully pop, and they think that like if someone sells a very large position, it will be like the end of Bitcoin. And then it's like, actually, someone just sold $9 billion worth of Bitcoin in like less than 7 days. Like maybe this is a little bit of a bigger market than you originally thought it was. And so I think it's a great sign. I mean, is it closing in on a window to where you can only get, sub $500,000 Bitcoin? Perhaps. I don't know for sure. I think at some point, like, we look back now, it's like, well, will we ever be able to buy sub $10,000 Bitcoin? Probably not. And it's like, will we ever be able to buy sub $100,000 Bitcoin? Who knows? Maybe not. And, we'll probably eventually get to a point where it's like, you won't even be able to buy sub $1 million Bitcoin. And, that's coming. Maybe it comes, sooner rather than later. Maybe it comes, years down the line. It's hard to really tell. My personal view, that way I think about things is like, you never know. Like Bitcoin is a very clear asymmetric opportunity to where it could take just one government action, one large corporation, and then this thing is just completely off to the races, and there's no turning back in any serious way. That could be something as simple as the Bitcoin Act from Senator Cynthia Lummis that gets passed, and all of a sudden the United States is about to buy, million something Bitcoins over the next 4 years, which would be, obviously incredibly insanely bullish for the price of Bitcoin. Could be a large corporation, opening position. Could be other governments or central banks opening position. I mean, at the end of the day, like there's a lot of things that could happen that could like hit that one last domino and really cascade the, quote unquote hyper Bitcoinization that we're arguably probably living through right now, but could really begin to accelerate at some point. So, again, like it's hard to tell, and like there's absolutely nothing guaranteed at all. But it definitely does seem like we're a couple dominoes or one domino away from this thing really getting to the next level.
Everything you are learning in this episode is completely moot and does not matter if you hold Bitcoin and are still leaving it on an exchange or sharing keys and your KYC information with a third party. This is your wake-up call now. You are only self-sovereign if you alone hold the keys to your wealth. 100% self-custody sounds daunting at first. Believe me, I lost 2 years of massive gains over a decade ago because I was worried about taking the few minutes it took to understand self-custody. And that's exactly why you need to talk to my friends, Tony Yazbek and his team at The Bitcoin Way. We just interviewed Tony recently, has over 80,000 views, an overwhelming response. People love his story and the simplicity he shares of how easy it is to custody and take ownership of the greatest money we've ever seen. They'll train you to do it right the first time. Head on over to thebitcoinway.com/Brandon to schedule a free 30-minute consultation today. Their 5-star rated service is exactly what you need. Quit sitting on your hands like I did and get started today. Again, that's thebitcoinway.com/BRANDON. Now that you have the team in place, you need the professional tools. My partners at Stampseed have them for you. Do not save your generational wealth on paper. Save it in titanium. It's estimated that 30% of all Bitcoin is lost forever, and that's only going to increase. Do not be a statistic. Go to Stampseed, check out with code Brandon, BRANDON for 15% off store-wide. Save your generational wealth in titanium for generation after generation and sleep well at night. Yeah, I just feel like we're entering some incredible phase, really. I know Saylor called it the 10-year gold rush, last year. And it's like, it does feel like that for many reasons, though. It's not just like, oh, Bitcoin, then 99% issuance, it'll be, out in the public at that point. It's just from a civil unrest point of view, just everything, right? Politics coming to a head, like all these different things. It really feels like that fourth turning chaos that's coming to a large extent. And all the Bitcoiners are trying to like get everyone off the Titanic before it cracks in half, goes at a 45-degree angle and cracks in half. Like, let's get on the lifeboats. It's wild. I would love for you to, this is not your tweet, but it was something that Pierre, I think you just had reposted recently about, Pierre saying, like after more than a decade of degen 100x leverage auto liquidated offshore retail margin trading, the crypto influencers are convinced that Bitcoin treasury companies are a systemic risk. I think the opposite is true. Equities and derivatives will be shock absorbers. And I would love just your thoughts on this and why this is, because you feel like you see a lot of people starting to talk about this is the the Bitcoin treasury companies are the new meme coins. Like, each cycle is getting shorter. So like in the altcoin world, you had the ICOs, if people remember. Then you had 2020 the NFTs, and then we had like the meme coin phase just in the last year, 6 months, a year. But each one got like significantly shorter and shorter and shorter cycles. So, I know people are like, well, Bitcoin treasury companies are that next, memes, thing or whatever. So I would love your thoughts on this and why you think it is opposite, like Pierre is saying is here.
Yeah, this is a funny point, because I think a lot of people, especially like maybe the crypto community or Bitcoin skeptics in general, are seeing the Bitcoin treasury company phenomenon and the proliferation of all these companies, and they think that something is going to go wrong here in a really big way. And like, to be very clear, like, things can go wrong. Like, these are
Mm-hmm.
leveraged Bitcoin equities, many of them. However, it's like, if you actually look at what these companies are doing, there was another funny tweet kind of related to all of this, where it was like, people say the Bitcoin treasury companies are getting too leveraged, but like, all of them are literally, many of them are currently selling equity and then buying Bitcoin, which is like the opposite of leveraging up.
Yeah.
If you sell equity and buy Bitcoin, you're deleveraging your balance sheet. Whereas like, if you sell preferred equity, or you sell convertible debt, then that would be leveraging up your balance sheet. But if you actually look at a lot of these companies, they're not that leveraged at all. It's like, Strategy is maybe like as 10% or 20, less than 20% of their Bitcoin net asset value is leverage. Like, a lot of their balance sheet is just pure equity. It's comparing it to like real estate, where it's very common to buy a house with 10 or 20% down or less. Like, that's going 5x long real estate. Bitcoin treasury companies are basically putting 80% down or more, and then borrowing the final 20%. And that's that's a fairly common Bitcoin treasury company, or a leveraged Bitcoin treasury company. And so Bitcoin treasury companies are like going 1.2x long Bitcoin rather than going 5x long real estate. It's like, the real estate market and a lot of other markets are far more leveraged than the Bitcoin market. And, and the Bitcoin market is fairly under leveraged. Like, these companies so far have been executing in a fairly conservative manner. Now, of course, if Bitcoin falls 80, 90%, then yeah, a lot of these companies could be in trouble, especially if it doesn't come back up. But the way that they've structured their debt, where it's, again, the long duration debt with fairly low interest rate, then they should, like, Strategy did ride out the 2022 bear market. Strategy stock, as Pierre kind of pointed out in this tweet, was very volatile. It fell more than Bitcoin did in the 2022 bear market. I think that's what he was saying, when like, the equity values will be more volatile than Bitcoin itself, because these are leveraged Bitcoin equities. But that doesn't mean that, Bitcoin won't be volatile. And that doesn't mean that these companies are just going to disappear and go bankrupt. And so I think it's just like an interesting dynamic, because the outside of the world sees Bitcoin plus leverage, and they think the world's going to end, like, this is crazy. But then inside the Bitcoin community and the Bitcoin treasury phenomenon, it's like, yes, they are introducing a tiny, like relatively tiny amount of leverage compared to virtually every other industry. And yes, they are buying more Bitcoin with that, but they're not doing it in like an overly aggressive way, at least none that I've seen quite yet. Maybe some might in the future, but so far it seems like everyone's doing it in a pretty conservative manner. And again, like, the debt is very long duration, so a lot of the companies don't have much to worry about anytime soon. And as long as Bitcoin continues to be good long-term savings technology, many of these companies probably won't experience any major issues. But it's just kind of a funny phenomenon, because like, there's a lot. It's like almost intuitive for the outside world to think that something is going to go wrong with this. And, so far, if you actually look into the details, it's one of the, least leveraged markets in the entire world right now. Yes, I think, if Bitcoin falls 50%, treasury companies will fall more than 50%. So the leveraged treasury companies for sure. But, there's no guarantee that Bitcoin will fall 50%. And, if so, it's like, it's still over a long enough time horizon. If Bitcoin keeps going up, you can still live through the drawdowns, as many of us Bitcoiners have in the past. As long as you have that low time preference and long time horizon, it could be something that will be good for Bitcoin itself and Bitcoin treasury companies.
What are your thoughts on just Saylor Strategy, what they're doing as well with all their offerings? I mean, they seemingly like every day they're coming out with a new offering. It almost sounds like they're inventing something and they're tapping into something that, legacy, TradFi like forgot about, like, oh yeah, we did have that in our arsenal and we weren't using it because it didn't make sense in the legacy world or whatever it is. But like, what are weekly almost, they're like coming out with something like, well, here, we're offering this now. I would love for you to just unpack this a little bit and just your thoughts on kind of where they've been and maybe their evolution, just for a minute, but also what they're doing right now and what you see going forward and how it's shaping what you guys are doing similar.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this probably plays into part of the confusion from traditional finance and also like the hardcore Bitcoiners, because they see these, crazy, interesting, confusing, advanced preferred equity offerings. They don't get it, obviously. And they're like, what is going on here? This doesn't seem right. This is over financial engineering. And again, it's like I pointed out, there's ways in which this does fail. It's like if Bitcoin falls 90% and stays there for like 5 years straight, these, that would create some serious problems for a lot of these companies. And like, that's the risk that you're taking with Strategy or any of these leveraged Bitcoin equities. And so with that being said, I think a way to explain what Strategy is doing with their preferred equity is Saylor thinks of it as, okay, Bitcoin is just this thing that's growing at roughly 30% per year for the foreseeable future. That's his view. And so he can create an assortment of financial products that are fixed income products. They pay a fixed amount of dollars in the future, something like STRF, which might pay like a 7 or 8% annual dividend on the stock. He issues those, effectively borrowing dollars at a 7% rate, and then buys Bitcoin with it that's growing at 30%. And then that spread between the 7% and the 30% is captured by MSTR. And that's kind of like the leverage Bitcoin position that these Bitcoin treasury companies are doing. And so it kind of creates two interesting, unique products for investors that hasn't existed before because no one created it really, right? And so it's, again, you have these leveraged Bitcoin equities like MSTR, which are borrowing money and buying Bitcoin, but then they issue these other securities that are kind of like Bitcoin, but with training wheels. Like it's still powered by Bitcoin underneath, except the returns are going to be less because you're opting into like a fixed income product rather than Bitcoin itself. But since the returns are going to be less, you're going to be a lot less volatile. And so like if you are an older person or you're like absolutely terrified of Bitcoin's volatility, or you think Bitcoin's going to just go flat for a long time in a volatile manner, then these fixed income products could be really appealing to you. And so it's really just creating different flavors of Bitcoin is another way they framed it for these different types of investors that are out there that, want a higher dividend rate on their fixed income or want a higher fixed income yield, but don't want to take more risk. It's like Michael Saylor was like, okay, well, we have these different assortment of, financial securities out there for you. And you can kind of pick whichever one that you want, depending on your volatility tolerance and your risk preference. And so I think that that's exactly what he's doing. And he's obviously done it pretty well. Like I think the STRC IPO that is just happened or is in the process of happening right now was like the largest IPO this year, 2025. It's like $2.5 billion. So clearly there's a lot of market demand for the securities that he's creating. And I think Semler Scientific, other Bitcoin treasury companies are likely going to, follow in Saylor's footsteps. And our proxy statement for this year, we added the ability, or we're requesting the ability to authorize a blank check preferred stock for Semler Scientific. And so in a way, if that gets passed by the shareholders, then that will authorize Semler Scientific to do something perhaps similar to what Strategy has done. And it seems like other Bitcoin treasury companies, whether that will be MetaPlanet or others, if I had to guess, might be following in similar footsteps and copying this strategy. Because again, it's like you have this segment of the market that wants to leverage Bitcoin position because it's a pretty attractive position if you think Bitcoin's going to go up. And then you have this more conservative segment of the market that's like, okay, I just wanted a high fixed yield or fixed dividend on my investments. I don't want to experience the volatility. I don't really care how it works. Just give me the money every month or every quarter. It's basically a win-win scenario, and it's all built on top of Bitcoin, which is simply a better form of money that's in the process of being monetized. So I can see how a lot of people are confused by it. And I think that that's honestly like a positive sign for the future. Like I think of Bitcoin over the last 16 years has been one of the most hated contrarian trades of all time. Like so few people still get it and own a significant portion of it in their portfolio. Yet, it's a $2-something trillion asset and, perhaps could be a 20 or $200 trillion asset. And it's just like right now, the contrarian trade within the Bitcoin trade is the Bitcoin Treasury company trade, which is also like one of the most hated trades in the entire world, which to me, it's like, if you're trying to allocate capital and outperform the market, you need to find opportunities that the outside world thinks are absolutely insane and they hate it.
True.
And that's how you're going to, generate outsized returns in the future. And to me, it's like Bitcoin and Bitcoin Treasury companies are just like one of the most contrarian trades of all time.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Like you said, that Bitcoin is the hurdle rate, right? Bitcoin in self-custody is itself, and the hurdle rate for many reasons, right? Whether it's independence or freedom, and it's the actual rate you're trying to achieve to outrun other investments you could be making, right? So I love that point. It's a great segue into price, and just you had a tweet recently as well. I think it was one of your videos actually about the $300 trillion fixed income market, and there's whether it's insurance, which is tied to that, just the general insurance market for people that just like whether it's really all insurances in essence. So that market right there alone, not even tapping into real estate or these other markets and the premiums that Bitcoin's sucking away. But I would love for you to just touch on the fixed income market and how Bitcoin is really disrupting that and going to be disrupting it even more. And so where you think, I guess, short term, where you think that we're headed here in the next 6 to 12 months? Like, are we have an elongated cycle? I know Dr. Jeff and I had him on the pod a couple of months, like 2 months ago, and Danny had him on just like a month after that, and then I think Preston just had him on. So I just the couple times I've seen Dr. Jeff for the last couple of months, he's like, hey, this might get extended. And now he's kind of in that camp now. It looks like of like Q1, Q2 of next year, like we're having an extension of the cycle. But where do you kind of stand on just the cycles, super cycle, and also the fixed income just market, and how this is starting to disrupt and kind of come together?
Yeah, I can start with like the fixed income market and then go to, what I think Bitcoin might do over 6 to 12 months. One, with the fixed income market, I think that that's exactly what's happening with Strategy and potentially future Bitcoin Treasury companies issuing these preferred equity fixed income products. And they're tapping into that $300 trillion market that exists that's, allocated from institutional investors, from retail investors, from a variety of different, and everyone in between effectively. Bitcoin treasury companies like Strategy are really just providing a superior product for that market. It's something that has higher yield and lower risk, massively over collateralized. And so it's like, if that is true, and if Bitcoin, can help companies create these securities, then it's only a matter of time before institutional allocators allocate to the highest yielding, lowest risk, products that are out there for on behalf of their investors. And so it's something that could really accelerate in a very positive way, perhaps in a relatively short period of time. Again, like who knows how fast it can go. And again, it can also flip both ways, right? Like if the market is very optimistic about Bitcoin, then Strategy and other companies can start issuing a lot of these securities and effectively borrowing dollars and buying more Bitcoin. And the very act of kind of creating these securities is almost like creating more dollars that exist in the system, because the dollar is a debt-based monetary tool. So when you create more debt into the system, it effectively creates more dollar denominated debt, which in a way is kind of like a dollar IOU that just kind of now exists, that was created out of thin air. And then they use those dollars that they raise to buy more Bitcoin. And when they buy more Bitcoin, that's kind of like strengthening Bitcoin while weakening the dollar at the same time. And you can kind of see how that could become like a very positive feedback loop if you keep doing it over and over. Obviously, like Pierre Richard has termed this the idea of a speculative attack. Well, I think Paul Krugman may have created it originally, but Pierre made it popular kind of in the Bitcoin space. And it makes perfect sense, right? Like if you just borrow the weak currency, which creates more of a debt-based money, and you buy the stronger currency, and that very act weakens the debt-based currency more, strengthens the stronger currency more, and it could really accelerate. So that's where like I think trying to time the Bitcoin market in the short term is just an absolute fool's game, because like I said, if something like the Bitcoin X gets passed, or Strategy really, or other Bitcoin treasury companies really ramp up that positive feedback loop, then this thing could get going incredibly fast. And from my perspective, the way a lot of people learn about Bitcoin to begin with is the numbers going up. I don't care if you're like you were like a libertarian type, or just a pro freedom type in general, or a technology enthusiast, or just an investor. It's like all of those segments. I think most of them probably learn about Bitcoin via NGU technology. And I think that the normal population is probably going to learn about Bitcoin via the number going up as well. And that just becomes a very clear positive feedback loop over time. And that's part of the reason why I think Bitcoin goes on these like parabolic bull runs, where it's like it's mispriced, and then all of a sudden makes a new all-time high. More people learn about it. They're like, oh wait, this is not a gimmick. It didn't die. It didn't die in 2017. It didn't die after 2021. It didn't die after 2025. Like this thing is still here. Wait, maybe it's a superior form of money. Like maybe it's not a bubble. Okay, that means I'd really need an allocation. And the thing that woke me up that's telling me I need an allocation is the number going up, which is really just the market allocating capital Bitcoin and saying like, hey, like this deserves a real position in your portfolio. Why is it not in your portfolio? And it just becomes a crazy feedback loop. So things could happen really fast, and it's not worth timing it, but it could also happen really slow. So the next 6 to 12 months, nothing too high would surprise me. Like I think that this thing could get completely out of control really fast, whether that's $500,000 Bitcoin or even $1 million per Bitcoin. I think it's certainly possible. However, if Bitcoin's at the same price or slightly lower 12 months from now, and stocks fall 20% for whatever reason, and inflation picks up and the Fed has to hike rates for whatever reason, like there's black swan type events that can, ignite another wave of demand for the dollar in a temporary manner, which will then, of course, just lead to more dollar debasement down the road. But it can happen in the short term. And I think it would hurt stocks. I think it would hurt real estate. And I think it would hurt Bitcoin. But at the end of the day, it's like they got to prop the system back up. They got to, lower interest rates. They got to keep printing more money via fiscal stimulus. There's a bunch of different things that they could do. At the end of the day, as Lynn Alden says, that the train has no brakes. Bitcoin and scarce assets are going higher, especially in dollar terms. It's just a matter of time, and it can happen fast, it can happen slow, but I think it's best for everyone to be prepared for either scenario.
Do you think that long term, and I know we'll keep it in today, because I know like everyone has like their different, people get fired up about this question about like long term, what's the total addressable market for Bitcoin? And you have like kind of the more famous examples of like, Jeff Booth saying it's 900 trillion. It has to account for all the dollars in the system, all the assets. And then you have, Jack Mallers saying it's 450, it's one half of every trade. And then you have, like the Peter Dunworths that are like, it's multiples of that. Actually, it's like beyond, a quadrillion. Then you've got obviously many people like way under that, right? It's the gold market cap, things of that nature. So in today's dollars, because I know people say, well, you can't price it. It could be $1 billion, blah, blah, blah. But in today's dollars, like what the fundamentals of money and the system itself, what do you think are you more like a Jack Mallers guy or a Jeff Booth guy? Like, how do you think Bitcoin will account for this system that we are in going forward? So this could be 10, 20, 50, 100 years from now. Like how do you kind of see that playing out?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've thought about it a fair amount. I definitely think it's, there's obviously going to be a range of outcomes, potential outcomes, and no one can predict the future. I definitely like to say, and I don't think this happens, but the bear case for Bitcoin is digital gold. Like
Mm-hmm.
at a bare minimum, I have really, really tough time seeing how Bitcoin is not a $20 trillion asset. And arguably, you could say gold, even at $20 trillion, is undervalued. And so maybe it's like closer to 40 trillion. So that would be like
Mm-hmm.
$1 to $2 million per Bitcoin. Seems like the absolute base case that
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to fathom how that would be wrong given if Bitcoin just continues to function as it has been for the last 16 years. The bull case, you know, like a decent bull case, I would say would be like an atom back perspective of like, okay, maybe it's like $300 trillion. Maybe it's like roughly 1/3 of all total global wealth. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
eventually global wealth is like, a third real estate, a third equities, and maybe a third Bitcoin, something along
Mm-hmm.
those lines. I think that could be reasonable. Another way to think about it, and I am definitely sympathetic to Peter Dunworth's perspective, where I do think a lot of people will say like, oh, well, it's infinity divided by 21 million, or it's like Bitcoin is one half of
Right.
everything. And like that could be true, but I also think that cannot be true because it kind of creates like an interesting dynamic where
Mm-hmm.
another way that I've thought about it is like in terms of how is a typical individual going to construct their portfolio. And it's like, if Bitcoin is the best way to save value over the long term, and you shouldn't be necessarily buying stocks if you're not, someone that's deeply analyzing companies, or you find a really good
Right.
investment, or you shouldn't be hoarding real estate unless like you're using it really for your person, your
Mm-hmm.
family. Um, so those two, traditional asset classes, I think you can make the argument that the typical portfolio should be a majority Bitcoin and then a minority everything else, equities, fixed income, gold, whatever. And I think if you make that argument, you could say like, okay, let's say for somehow, let's get pretty bullish, Bitcoin is 80% of a typical portfolio, and the remaining 20% is, real estate, stocks, everything else. In that scenario, if that's the average portfolio, well, then by definition, all of the Bitcoin in the world would then be worth more than everything else in the world. It would actually be worth like multiples more because there's the
Mm-hmm.
20% and then there's the 80%, and you extrapolate that to everybody, then 80% of the total world's wealth is Bitcoin, and 20% of the total world's wealth is everything else. And so there's a scenario where it's like Bitcoin is actually worth significantly more than everything else if Bitcoin is the world's best money, which and it's the world's best long-term savings technology, which actually is probably, it might be true.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where you get like really crazy numbers and probably like more in line with how Peter Dunworth thinks
Mm-hmm.
about it. Maybe that's a really long ways away, but maybe it's not. I don't know. Another way to think about this is like how, you mentioned in today's dollars, which can make sense. Like obviously I'm not saying like anyone can say, oh, well, they're going to print a bunch of dollars, so Bitcoin's going to be worth $1 trillion per coin. Like that's kind of pointless to even think about that. But is probably true, obviously, on a long enough time horizon.
Right.
But if you think about like Bitcoin in terms of its purchasing power, and like we're entering an think about the technology advances over the last 100 years. What are the technology advances going to be over the next 100 years? And so if you're trying to like evaluate the purchasing power of a Bitcoin in terms of like a loaf of bread, it could be like nearly infinite. Like
Mm-hmm.
an example might be something like, how much in 1970 did it cost to store a gigabyte worth of data? I mean, it probably costs thousands and maybe millions and millions of dollars. Now you can do that for like clearly less than $100,
Yeah.
less than $10, probably less than $1. And so it's like, if that same level of technology deflation, you know, happens in the physical world or with other goods and services that we consume today via AI, robotics, and other technologies that we can't even fathom, and Bitcoin remains perfectly scarce money and is kind of the best long-term savings technology. You pair two of those together, which is kind of like the Jeff Booth thesis. It's like
Mm-hmm.
this thing could be uncomprehensibly valuable, and it would just be kind of a matter of time and a matter of markets playing out as they have been for the last 100 years. And I think you mentioned Luke Broyles earlier. Like he has a good point where it's like a lot we accomplished a lot in the last 100 years, despite having massive pandemics, two global world wars, a Cold War. Like a lot of things went wrong, and it's like a lot of things could go wrong for the next 100 years. And as long as like we don't all blow up each other like permanently,
Mm-hmm.
then we're probably going to continue progressing at even the same rate, and maybe even accelerating. And even if we're progressing at the same rate, like the world is going to look far different than what it is today. So much wealth is going to be created. So much productivity is going to be unleashed. And if Bitcoin just continues functioning, Bitcoin would be worth, in terms of these basic consumer goods, an unfathomable amount of wealth.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So Semler, talk to me about what are you excited about? Like, what are some of your goals, short-term, long-term goals, things you can kind of touch on quick that are your public knowledge. What kind of has your gears going with the company right now?
Yeah. I mean, the whole Bitcoin Treasury company phenomenon excites me massively. And that's part of the reason why I left Unchained to join Semler, because I think it's so interesting what's happening, and it's compelling from the perspective of like a Bitcoiner. I always wanted to have a leverage position on Bitcoin over the years, but I was always like just way too scared to, because there wasn't a good way to do it. Because I brought up the idea of like BitMEX, and there's other platforms that could kind of do something similar. Bitcoin Treasury, like looking at Strategy's performance over the last 5 years now, effectively almost 5 years, I think it has actually outperformed Bitcoin, and it's outperformed Bitcoin in a way that I think a lot of Bitcoiners can understand, in the sense that they short the dollar and buy Bitcoin. And it's like the best way to do that is via a public company, because they can issue these long duration debt.
Mm-hmm.
They can tap into interest rates that normal people can't access. And that's what makes, this entire thing so fascinating. And so at Semler, we are trying to build something like that. And that's what I'm excited about. Like we have $100 million convertible note that's outstanding that gives us some form of intelligent leverage. Like I mentioned earlier, we're looking to authorize a potential blank check preferred stock, which could enable Semler to create something similar to what Strategy has created with their preferred equity. And it's just like a really exciting time to like be involved in the Bitcoin space. I think that our goal this year is to get to 10,000 Bitcoin. I think we'll be able to do it, and we'll be able to do it via potentially like a preferred stock offering, via common equity ATMs, via like the convertible note that we've already issued, via cash flow from our healthcare operating business. So it's just, to me, it's a really exciting time to be in the Bitcoin space. And it's a really exciting time to like just be involved with Semler Scientific, which is like my view, like truly embracing the Bitcoin ethos, and really trying to amplify the future returns of Bitcoin, which is something that I'm personally interested in a very big way. So yeah, it's very exciting, and I'm super honored to just be a part of the team.
It's going to be incredible just going forward to see what happens with all the public markets and how Wall Street, I mean, it feels like Wall Street, and really Wall Street and Silicon Valley to a large extent, both just still kind of whistling by the graveyard with Bitcoin, and just being like, we're outperforming all of you guys. Like what in the world is going on, and how are you so blind to it? It goes back to like, the Musk, Elon, and just like it feels like people are tap dancing around the issue, and like, we're almost like Bitcoiners are like, are we being pranked? Like, do you people not see this? Like, we're like right in your house, we're like in your living room, and you're like walking around us, sitting on the couch, watching TV. You're like, we're right here. We're like this person you didn't invite over, and you don't know who we are. And we're not going to say anything. I don't know. Just fascinating. So, what you guys are doing in so many of the companies, it's going to be just incredibly fascinating to see as this plays out. So do you, what are you most excited about just in the Bitcoin space in general? And hopefully, try to say something other than Bitcoin treasury companies, I guess, but what are you most excited about, or what are you most hopeful in the Bitcoin space? And then also, what is your biggest fear? Maybe the thing that's, kind of got you on edge in the Bitcoin space right now.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thing that I'm most hopeful about in the Bitcoin space probably is honestly seeing the number going up and seeing adoption take place, whether that's Bitcoin treasury companies or whether that's individuals buying Bitcoin for themselves in their own self-custody manner. I think it's very positive just to have the number going up and to have that next wave of adoption like pretty clearly taking place at this point. And I think like there's exciting developments like Lightning and whatnot, like Stake and Shake adopting Lightning, but I think like the core, protocol of what Bitcoin is, it works. The monetary policy is, as immutable as it can possibly be, and it doesn't need to change much. It more simply needs to not break at this point. And so I think that as long as Bitcoin continues functioning, the world will continue to come to grasp what Bitcoin is and why it's a useful monetary tool. And I think that's exciting. Things that I'm concerned about in the Bitcoin space, there's nothing like incredibly concerning. Like there's plenty of ways that Bitcoin could fail or bad things could happen. Like a global war would be terrible. Nuclear bombs going off would be absolutely horrible. Those things can happen. A sudden break in cryptographic primitives could be bad. Like quantum computing becoming like very real, very fast would not be ideal. I don't think it kills Bitcoin. I think there's ways to fix it. And I think the Bitcoin community would fix it. And I follow the Bitcoin development mailing list. Like they're already working on like how would an upgrading process look like? How fast could we do it? What would the BIPs look like? What cryptographic primitives would we pivot to? And it's like, it's something that we got to be thinking about and need to be aware of, but it's not in my view, it's not an imminent threat to Bitcoin, even if it comes faster than many expect. So I think, so there's not really anything that's like incredibly pressing for me right now, but I think there's a lot to be hopeful for when it comes to just the future of Bitcoin adoption.
What orange pilled you and gave you your biggest aha? Like what were your, those moments that really kind of changed everything for you? For me, it was like seeing the log chart in Bitcoin and then just really learning. I think it was from Max, like in 2017 or 2018, just like holding your wealth in your head and just being right. And just being able to go around the earth and not being locked down to real estate. I was a real estate guy for 10 years. And those ahas just blew my mind. What was it for you that really kind of, set you over the edge?
Yeah, maybe two things. One is like in undergrad, I studied information systems and computer science. So I had a pretty decent grasp on like how computers worked. Setting up my own wallet and writing down a seed phrase and then basically, buying a new hardware wallet and downloading new software and a new computer and then restoring that same wallet on a different device and seeing that like, wow, like this is like I can access my wealth via literal data, 12 to 24 words without a trusted third party, without a government. Like this is crazy. Like this is like completely, this is like incredibly powerful tool that is literally, when people think about Bitcoin, they don't realize it's like a physical bearer asset that like you can actually like hold. It's almost like once you understand that what holding Bitcoin is like, it's almost like you can't even own anything else in the same way at all. It's hard. It's because like if you have real estate or you have stocks, well, it's like you may have a deed, which is like dependent on your county and you got to pay property taxes if you want to retain the
trust
deed.
That government.
Exactly. Or it's like a brokerage account. It's like, okay, well, the brokerage account actually holds the stock certificate. And like, what if your brokerage account goes down? Well, like you can't log in and check your stocks anymore. It's like, okay, well then how do you get access to it? Or what if the government just like comes in and changes the numbers? Like they could theoretically do that. Whereas like Bitcoin, it's a lot more like holding a physical gold bar in your hand that just exists and it's actually outside the system. Like most people definitely do not grasp that idea. And I think when I recognized that and like ran a node and realized like, wow, like this is like really powerful and a unique sovereign tool that has not existed before, that was pretty cool. And then the other thing was just maybe 2017 or like early 2018, that bear market, reading the Nakamoto Institute writings from like Pierre Richard, Bitstein, and Daniel Krawitz and others. It was like an interesting blog that had a lot of short, concise, but clear thoughts around Bitcoin as money, and just realizing that like Bitcoin had a far better monetary policy. You made a good point. Looking at the log chart of Bitcoin, realizing that like, oh, it wasn't just like one bubble in 2017. Like this has actually happened like countless times,
Mm-hmm.
2011, 2013, 2017, then 2021, and then 2025. It's like, wow, like this is just a, like a repeating adoption process that's playing out over and over again. Most people still just don't get it. If you logically think about it and you are willing to have an open mind, it's actually like not that complicated. It's just a better form of money. And we're entering the digital age. It's pretty logical that computers and the internet would possibly enable us to create a better form of money, given that we use government money. It's like, in what areas of our life has government ever been able to generate a solid product for us to all use?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, maybe we could actually improve what money is. And maybe that's exactly what Bitcoin has created. And so once I had that realization, I was like, all right, this thing's pretty interesting. I probably will not be able to stop thinking about it for quite some time. Yeah. Closing thoughts. Like I think everyone should have low time preference, think very long-term. Bitcoin is not a get rich quick scheme. It's incredibly volatile. Its volatility has been dropping, but the volatility can always come back. And I personally kind of expect that it will, hopefully to the upside in the short term, but time will tell.
Mr. Joe Burnett, thank you so much for joining me here today, brother. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Brandon. Enjoyed it.
If you like that episode, then you're going to love the playlist we put together for you with our most recent podcast with the top Bitcoiners, sound money, liberty advocates in the world. Go check those out here. We'll see you inside. You're going to love them.